Auburn football fans want to give everyone a big war eagle out there in Auburn Nation. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here on the podcast for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, where it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger. And on the loveliest village of the plains, the battle cry is War Eagle. Let's go ahead and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And before I begin this podcast, I want to apologize for the previous video, as it was a duplicate of the video before. That was actually brought to my attention by one of the subscribers when I was editing it. I just mismatched the thumbnail for that particular video. My apologies sincerely, War Eagle. Today, we're just going to go ahead and make this the day 4 video of fall camp, and some things that Auburn, some items that Auburn really want to pay attention to during the fall camp is special teams. Okay. Auburn will have to, well, before we get started with that, just so some of our casual fans understand the importance of certain aspects of special teams. One, you have your punt team, right? So your punt team is responsible for, let's just say, 4th down. They have to kick the ball. What they want to do is they want to force field position. Okay, they want to have favorable field position. So having a good punter and a good cover team is very important. As a matter of fact, this was very costly a few years ago for the Auburn Tigers. If you think about Auburn having a great chance to beat LSU down in Baton Rouge, a punt return, I think it was either punt return or kick return for a touchdown. That's one play that can change the total scope of the game. So instead of a team having to drive down the field to score, they zip you in one pop. Okay. That's why special teams, that's why the punt team, that's why the punt return team, kickoff team is very important. You don't think special teams are important? Ask Nick Saban, 2013. He had the option of either just letting time elapse, or he wanted to try to, I think he wanted to go ahead and try the winning field goal, because he saw that Auburn had the momentum and the likelihood of him winning in overtime. He just didn't feel good about it. So what does he do? He lines his field goal team up. The kick comes up short. He's got all his fat guys on the field. No way they were going to stop Auburn from scoring that particular touchdown. Chris Davis Jr. goes into Auburn history and folklore because of that particular kick six return. So all of those things are very important. And, you know, solidifying that particular portion of the team is going to be important, because those things change games. Those items can be the difference in an 8-5 team or a 10-2 team, or a double-digit win team going into November with a possibility to compete for SEC championship and beyond. One of the areas that I'm sort of concerned about is the kick return position, because Ryan Davis was such a reliable force in that particular part for the Auburn Tigers. Christian Tutt actually did some good things on the kick return team, showed some sure hands. One of the things that's very important when you talk about your return specialist is catching the football, and also making the right decisions as to when to catch the football, when not to catch the football, when to run, or when to stay. Okay, because sometimes, kick returners can get real cute and, be 5 deep in the end zone and feel like they can make something happen, then run out and get trounced on the 10-yard line. And that puts your team, your offense, in very bad field position. So you got to have that guy who's going to make that decision. So Ryan Davis is going to be a pretty tough guy to replace in that regard. But you got plenty of options. I mean, you got guys like Sean Shivers, Mark Anthony Richards, who will be coming this fall out of Florida, incoming freshman. He could be an option. You want to kind of shy away from your running backs, even though Auburn does do this, but you want to shy away from your running backs being in that particular realm because of the possibility of injuries. Noah Igbenogany took one back on a kickoff return for the Tigers last year against Arkansas. He could be a possible option. Another area of the special teams that I'm probably more so concerned with than even the kickoff return, punt specialist is the place kicking for the Tigers. I think the place kicking took a real step back because we were spoiled by Daniel Carlson, who was 80%. I don't think he missed the extra point, but he was 80% in field goal range. And that gave Auburn a huge advantage to where if they crossed the 50-yard line, that was typically scoring range because Daniel Carlson was not only accurate, he had a lot of range as a kicker. Now, his brother Anders Carlson took over last year. Now, he had the leg, but at times the accuracy was questionable. And you talk about the Auburn Tigers going from a field goal percentage of 80% to 60%. And if you think about all those points that are left on the table, they begin to add up, especially in your close games. There was a situation in the Mississippi State game where Auburn could have garnished a little bit of momentum. He misses the field goal. Even in the Washington game, could have been very costly. He missed one against Washington. So you want to make sure that, one, I think it might have been an overestimation on Gus Malzahn and his staff's part. I think they were so accustomed to the reliability of Daniel Carlson that they automatically thought that Anders Carlson had that immediate ability. You got to remember, this was a young guy. He was a freshman. And you're asking him to kick a 50-yard field goal in a game against a team like Washington, Mississippi State, where the consequences are really high. I believe with a little experience under his belt, he can get to the point where he can be much more reliable, kind of like how his brother Daniel Carlson was. Also, too, I think Auburn just needs to continue to move the chains to where, depending on the field goal kicker, is not so much. You got to score touchdowns in the red zone. I think it's a problem when your kicker is one of the highest scorers in school history. Okay, that means you're not scoring touchdowns. 3 points is great, but in a lot of cases, 3 points is a defensive stop for the other team because they can come right back and gain 4 points by scoring a touchdown. All right, so those are the things that are going to be very important. What is Auburn doing in fall camp to improve the place kicking portion of the special teams? Because that's going to be very important, especially in the games like Oregon, the stretch of the SEC between Texas A&M and LSU. All of those little things, guys, are what comes back to haunt, and being very, very specific and deliberate in making sure that these items are covered is going to be very important in this fall camp. Because I'm telling you, poor special teams, look at Alabama. It's been a while since they've had a reliable place kicker, and at times it's told on them, and it's kept teams in games where, otherwise they wouldn't have been. Okay, so I want you guys to keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the place kicking, because we want, even if Anders Carlson can improve, say, from 60% to, say, even 70, that's some more points on the table. Because what Daniel Carlson did was just, absolutely phenomenal. So that's something that we definitely want to look for going into the 2019 season. And I think the Auburn Tigers will be able to key in on some of the things and some of the scenarios that they place Anders Carlson in, and probably put him in more high percentage situations this year than last year. Because I think, Auburn prematurely put Anders Carlson in some very, very premature situations, overestimating his accuracy. Like I said, the distance was there, but the accuracy at times was not. During the offseason, just to switch gears a little bit, during the offseason, Gus Malzahn went and hired Kenny Dillingham after Chip Lindsey departed, first to go to Kansas, then a couple of days later takes the head coaching job at Troy University. This makes the third offensive coordinator during the tenure of Gus Malzahn. At first, the Rhett Lashley relationship was working, but then Gus Malzahn decides to call plays, and the offense began to slow down a little bit. Also had some recruiting misses during that time with Sean White, Jeremy Johnson, Woody Barrett didn't turn out as good as we would have liked. He transfers. Also, in a really, really desperate attempt to mimic what Nick Marshall brought to the table, went to the junior college market and picked up on John Franklin III, and we all know how that turned out. Here we are, fast forward, two offensive coordinators later. Auburn goes out and hires Kenny Dillingham from Memphis. Kenny Dillingham is an incredibly young coach, probably the youngest offensive coordinator in college football. He's only 28 years old. As a matter of fact, I think he and Cord Sandberg might be the same age. But either way, Kenny Dillingham, we don't know, guys. We don't know what he brings to the table because he doesn't know. He hasn't been in the field long enough. But from all intents and purposes, he has the potential. And he has become a very, very good recruiter because he has a lot of energy and he has a lot of passion and he has a lot of focus as to what he wants to accomplish. One thing I noticed, even in his practices, he appears to be very detail oriented. He appears to be wanting to learn the concepts of the job, because if you think about it, was Nick Saban when he first began? No. Was Kirby Smart the coach that he wound? They have to start somewhere. And what a situation for Auburn at this point for Kenny Dillingham to start at a viable SEC school under a coach that's going to take away the play calling pressures from him. Because I feel like as a brand new offensive coordinator, you don't need the play calling duties anyway. Okay. And given Gus Malzahn's wanting to call plays, this is a perfect match because Kenny Dillingham is going to come in from with a very difference-minded mentality to where he's going to be coachable. And when you have a coach like Gus Malzahn who kind of micromanages the play calling, and that's his thing, and he trusts himself, if he's going to bank on something, he's going to bank on his ability to call plays. He needs someone that's going to help him out. And not in the realm of calling plays. He needs someone who's going to help out with developing quarterbacks and with helping to develop the overall schematics of the offensive scheme. So one thing that Kenny Dillingham is not going to do, he's not going to call plays. Now, I would think that he would be, showing Gus, hey, here's what I see happening. Here's what I see happening. Here's what we can do. But ultimately, he understands that Gus is the primary play caller, and that way you won't have the headbutting. You won't have the differences in philosophies. Hey, I want my philosophy to go. No, I'm starting to develop my philosophy when we talk about Rhett Lashley wanting to identify himself as an offensive coordinator, wanting to get from under the shadows of Gus Malzahn, and then that's where you start the rift and the disarray. And that's where you start the situation where you have a good defense, but now all of a sudden, in an unheard of fashion, the Gus Malzahn offense takes a huge step back. And that's something that has been trending for the last 3 years, 2016, 2017, and 2018. You just started to see the trend of offense taking a step back because Gus Malzahn got away from what makes him dynamic. During his time as a play caller, just putting up massive numbers against SEC teams. It didn't matter how great the defenses were. He was able to move the ball and move the ball very consistently, had high numbers per game, and it just makes sense. But to have and to be able to groom a guy like Kenny Dillingham, who seems to be very willing to learn, seems to be very excited to have the opportunity that many are not given. There are not many. It probably will never happen again in the foreseeable future for a guy as young as Kenny Dillingham to have the opportunity to be on the forefront as an offensive coordinator at an SEC school that, not year in and year out, but at some points has opportunities to compete for championships. This is really a huge opportunity for Kenny Dillingham. And that's the best way that I can describe what Kenny Dillingham brings to the table, is he brings an opportunity not only for himself, but for Auburn to see what he has to offer. I know the quarterback play improved under his watch in Memphis, but we just don't have enough sample size to really know what he can do. Now, some of our more, quick-minded fans would say, okay, well, he's just there as a puppet for Gus Malzahn. Now, I don't even want to support a team that will pay someone $500,000 a year to be a puppet. I think that's absolutely mindless. I think that makes absolutely zero sense. for a Power 5 school with aspiration to compete for championships to hire someone as a puppet. There is something that he's going to be able to do, and that is help develop the quarterbacks. That's not something that Gus Malzahn is good at. That's not even something that Gus Malzahn wants to do. Gus Malzahn wants to get that fast-paced offense going. That's why you notice in his tenure, he gets quarterbacks that's already ready. Cam Newton, Nick Marshall, Jarrett Stidham, Chris Todd already had some experience. So that's not his thing. I mean, let's just be honest. I see it on social media all the time. Well, Gus Malzahn can't develop quarterbacks. No, he can't develop quarterbacks because that's not what he does. Okay, so that's the thing with that. Kenny Dillingham, they say he brings like a massive amount of energy. Of course, has been very, very active on the recruiting trail. Auburn has improved tremendously over the last 2 months with their spot in the recruiting class, about number 12 now compared to 29 or 30 about a month and a half ago. So all we can do is go based on the results of what we're seeing, because you can't speculate results. You see Auburn goes from number 29 to number 12. That's no mistake. You see that there is a different type of attitude and a different type of atmosphere at Auburn. Will that translate to wins? Only time will tell. But I guarantee you, with a negative attitude and a negative approach towards your season, chances are you're not going to produce wins. So all we can do is go by now is the positive energy that seems to be developing on the Plains. I think Kenny Dillingham and Gus Malzahn can be potentially a good relationship, as long as Kenny Dillingham, at least for the first few years that he's there, stays in a studious type mode to learn the job and then develop into the offensive coordinator that he can eventually develop into. And I think that's something that will happen. So either way, I think it's a good situation for Auburn. At least you have an offensive coordinator that's probably going to be there, assuming everything goes well with Gus and his retention this year. He's going to be there with them for at least 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, because that's what you need. You need a guy who's going to be tenured. You don't need to continue to turn over offensive coordinators, because that's going to hurt you recruiting wise as well. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here on the podcast tonight. Sorry about the duplicate videos, but this is the actual video of the Placekicking special teams videos and talking about Kenny Dillingham and Gus Malzahn. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart. We're here again on the podcast. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel. On this one, it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.